It is 9:40 on a Friday morning, and I am sitting in my car in the parking lot of my husband's office, watching the little blue dot on my phone calmly tell me a lie. The dot is him. Or it is supposed to be him. That is the whole problem. For 2 years, we've shared our locations on our phones, his idea, actually, back when he said it would make him feel safer knowing I got home okay. And right now that blue dot is sitting 40 miles away, in a town I have no reason to think about, at a building I've never heard of, at a time he told me, this morning, over coffee, that he had a budget meeting at his office. His office is the building I am parked in front of right now, the one I drove to this morning with 2 coffees in the cup holder. His car is not in the lot. The coffees are going cold. I'm going to tell you what was 40 miles away. I'm going to tell you what I did about it, step by step, over the next 11 days. But I want you to sit in this car with me for a second first. Because this is the exact moment a marriage quietly ends, not with a scream, but with a woman staring at a small blue dot, feeling the floor go very, very still beneath her. Before I drive anywhere, I want to ask you something, and I genuinely want your answer in the comments. If your partner's phone put them somewhere they swore they weren't, would you call them right then and demand an answer? Or would you say nothing and quietly start following the data? Be honest. Because the entire reason this story ends with me standing on solid ground instead of falling through the floor is the choice I made in that parking lot. Tell me what you do. I read every single one. And before I go on, I want to say something to anyone watching who has ever felt that quiet, sick instinct that something is off, and then talked themselves out of it. That instinct is not paranoia. It is pattern recognition. It is the oldest, most reliable part of your mind noticing that 2 things don't line up, long before the rest of you is ready to admit it. For months, I had felt it and overruled it, because believing my husband was easier than believing my own eyes. The morning of the dot, I finally stopped overruling it. And everything good that happened after the clarity, the calm, the solid ground I'm standing on now started the second I decided to trust what I noticed instead of arguing with it. So if you're feeling it right now, watching this, I'm not telling you what it means. I'm just telling you not to talk yourself out of looking. Here's what you need to understand about how I got to that car. My husband's name is Greg, and we'd been married 7 years. Greg was a planner, a details man, the kind of person who color-coded the garage and labeled the spice jars. He liked systems. He liked knowing where things were. And it was Greg who, 2 years earlier, had set up location sharing between our phones framed, like everything Greg framed, as being for me. So I never have to worry about you, he said. I thought it was sweet. I never once thought of it as something that could point the other way. People who feel safe don't check the map. I had never, in 2 years, looked at his dot. Until this morning, when he kissed me goodbye, told me about his budget meeting, and something in the way he said it too smooth, too rehearsed, made me open the app for the first time in my life. I want to be honest about the weeks before that morning, because the dot wasn't really the first sign. It was just the first one I couldn't explain away. For a couple of months, something had been quietly off, in the way a room feels different when one piece of furniture has been moved an inch and you can't say which one. Greg had been more affectionate, not less, buying me little gifts, complimenting me at odd times, and I've since learned that's its own kind of tell, the guilt that dresses itself up as romance. He'd started showering the moment he got home. He'd gotten protective of his phone in a way a man who set up location sharing for my safety had no reason to be. And the budget meetings there had been a lot of budget meetings lately, for a man whose job had never involved this many budgets before. I'd noticed all of it the way you notice weather building. I just hadn't let myself name it. The morning of the dot, I finally did. And the dot was 40 miles away. So here I am, 9:40 on a Friday, and I am doing the single most important thing I will do in this entire story, which is nothing. I am not calling him. I am not driving 40 miles to that building to bang on a door. Because in this car, in this moment, I understand one thing with perfect clarity. The second Greg knows that I looked at the map goes dark. He turns off sharing. He gets careful. He gets a story straight. Right now, he believes he is the only one of us who knows where he really is. And that belief is the most valuable thing I own. So, I am going to protect it. I am going to put my phone down, drive to work, and become the wife who never checks the map. But first, I take a screenshot. Time-stamped. The dot, the address, the lie. The first page of a file I don't know yet I'm building. I sat in that parking lot for almost 20 minutes after I took it. I want to tell you I was calculating. Cold. Already 3 moves ahead, but the truth is the first 10 of those minutes I just shook. There is a specific grief in watching a small blue dot tell you that the life you thought you were living is partly fiction. It is so small, that dot. So undramatic. A little circle on a map. And it had just quietly rearranged 7 years. But somewhere in the second 10 minutes, the shaking turned into something steadier and more useful. I realized I had a choice about who I was going to be in this story. I could be the woman who falls apart, or the woman who pays attention. And I had a strange advantage most people in my position don't get. A head start. He didn't know I knew. As long as that stayed true, the advantage was mine. So I wiped my face, fixed my makeup in the mirror, and drove to work like it was the most ordinary Friday in the world. Day 1 continues, and I do something that costs me everything not to do sooner. I wait. That evening, Greg comes home and tells me, unprompted, that his budget meeting ran long and was a nightmare. He volunteers detail. He's a planner, he's covering. And I say, poor you, that sounds exhausting, and I make dinner, and I file the lie next to the screenshot. He has no idea he just confirmed it. Day 1 ends, and I barely sleep. Not from crying, from thinking. Lying next to a man whose chest rises and falls so peacefully, so sure his secret is his alone, while my mind quietly sorts through everything I'll need to do. It is a strange intimacy. Lying beside someone you've just begun, very calmly, to investigate. I felt no rage in the dark. I felt focus. And somewhere around 3 in the morning, I made the rule I'd live by for the next 11 days. I would never ask him a single question I didn't already know the answer to. Every question I asked from here on would be a test, not a search. If I already knew the truth, his lie would tell me something. If I didn't, his lie would just protect him. So I would gather first and ask never. Day 2. I start watching the dot. Not obsessively carefully. I screenshot it at the same times each day, building a record, same format, same timestamps, a clean and boring and utterly damning little archive. And a pattern emerges almost immediately. Because Greg, for all his systems, is a creature of habit. The dot goes to that same building 40 miles away 2, sometimes 3 times a week. Always on days he tells me he has meetings or is working late. I look up the address, half hoping it'll turn out to be a satellite office, a client site, anything with an innocent explanation. It is a quiet, residential apartment complex. Not an office. Not a client site. Not anything a budget meeting has ever happened in. If your stomach dropped just now the way mine did looking up that address, do me one quick favor before I tell you whose apartment it was. Tap like and subscribe to the channel. I'm not asking for nothing. These calm, methodical revenge stories get buried by the algorithm unless people actually engage. And your one tap is the only reason the next one reaches a woman sitting in a parking lot tonight, looking at a dot that doesn't make sense. And believe me, what the data led me to is the part that changes everything. I sat with that word for a while. An apartment. Not a one-time mistake at a hotel. Not a drunken lapse in apartment. Visited on a schedule, with a routine. A second home. A second life with a second set of habits, slotted neatly into the gaps in our marriage that Greg had labeled meetings and working late. The planner in him hadn't just had an affair. He'd built it like one of his systems, with a location and a rhythm and a budget line. And the same orderliness that made it feel so calculated was, I would soon realize, exactly what was going to undo him. A man who builds a system leaves a trail. Chaos is hard to follow. Habits are easy. Day 4. I need a name. And here is where being patient instead of loud paid for itself. Because I didn't have to snoop through Greg's phone and risk tipping him off. The data did the work. Our shared accounts, the ones Greg managed so carefully, told the story on their own. A food delivery to that address on a night he was working late, ordered from an app linked to our shared account. He'd been so careful about the map and so careless about everything else. A rideshare home from that address at an hour he'd told me he was still stuck in a meeting. A streaming login from a device that wasn't ours on our shared account, playing shows at that apartment on the nights he was working late. And finally, on a calendar he'd forgotten synced to a tablet we kept in the kitchen, a recurring entry he thought only he could see, with a single initial and a heart. That calendar entry is the one that broke something in me, more than the dot. More than the apartment. Because it was recurring. Every Tuesday and Thursday, set to repeat, the way you schedule something you intend to keep doing for a long time. He hadn't stumbled into this. He had put it in his calendar, with a little heart, like a standing appointment, like a part of his life he was organizing for the foreseeable future. A man does not set a recurring entry for a fling. He sets it for a life. And there it was, quietly syncing to a tablet in our kitchen where the kids did their homework. Because the great planner had a blind spot, and his blind spot was assuming no one else in the house was paying attention. The initial was simply R. One letter. A whole second life, hiding behind a single capital letter and a heart. And it didn't take long, once I had the building and the initial and the habit, to put a name to it. Her name was Renata. She was someone from a conference Greg had gone to the year before, someone he'd mentioned exactly once, casually, the way they always mention them exactly once, to inoculate themselves against the day you find out. I remembered the conference. I remembered Greg coming home from it a little brighter than usual, talking about the people he'd met, and I remembered the name Renata floating by in a sentence about a great panel. And I remembered thinking nothing of it, because why would I? That's the part that stays with you, not the betrayal itself, but how long it had been sitting in plain sight, wearing the costume of an ordinary detail. A year. It had been going on in some form for nearly a year, and it had walked through my living room as a casual anecdote, and I had handed it a drink and asked how the panel was. I didn't cry about that one. By day 4, I was past the crying. I just added the conference to the timeline, because the timeline was becoming the most honest thing in my marriage. So now I had the where, the when, and the who. What I did not have yet, and what I needed most, was a plan that protected me instead of just exposing him. Because here is the thing I understood in that parking lot on day 1 and never let go of. Catching him was easy. The blue dot caught him. Winning was the hard part, and winning is quiet. Day 5. I go to see a lawyer. I bring my file, the screenshots, the pattern, the address, the charges to our shared accounts, the calendar entry. And she tells me 3 things that change everything. The first, I had done the single smartest thing a person in my position can do, which was to document calmly before confronting. Most people, she said, see the dot, call the husband and start a fight. He denies it, deletes everything, turns off the location, and 3 weeks later it's her word against his with no proof. You have a time-stamped record of a pattern. You have receipts. You haven't just suspected something. You've built a case. The second, she walked me through exactly where I stood financially, and the news was better than I'd feared. Greg, the great planner, had assumed I never paid attention to our money because he always handled the big picture. But I'd spent day 3 pulling every record I had access to, and it turned out the careful planner had been quietly funding a second life Renata's rent help, the dinners, the gifts out of our shared accounts, in amounts just small enough to never trigger a question from a wife who trusted him. That spending, documented, didn't just prove the affair. In a divorce, dissipating marital money on an affair partner is the kind of thing that does not help the spender at all. She explained it to me in a way I've never forgotten. She said marital money is, in the eyes of the law, partly mine, and a spouse who quietly spends it on an affair isn't being romantic. He's spending money that half belongs to the person he's betraying. Courts have seen it 10,000 times, and they have a word for it. And the word is not flattering. So every dinner Greg bought Renata, every month he helped with her rent, every gift he gave her with our money, he wasn't just cheating. He was, very carefully and in writing, building a record of exactly the kind of behavior that tilts a divorce. The great planner had been keeping immaculate financial books on his own betrayal, and handing me, transaction by transaction, the receipts. And the third thing she told me, quietly, she said, "You don't owe him a confrontation. You don't owe him a chance to explain, or to spin it, or to make you doubt what the data already proved. You get to choose the moment, and the moment that serves you is the one where everything is already in place." So that's what I did. Over the next several days 6 through 10, I got everything in place, calmly, while Greg kept driving to that apartment believing the map was his secret. I made copies of every financial record. I moved my own savings into an account in my name only. I quietly secured the documents that mattered, the ones a careful planner keeps in a careful place. I am, by the way, going to tell you what I told my lawyer because I think it matters. I never broke into anything. I never took anything that wasn't mine to see. I never moved a dollar I wasn't entitled to. That was the whole discipline of those 11 days. The fastest way to lose the high ground would have been to do something I wasn't allowed to do, to drain an account, to break into his phone, to make a scene that let him cast me as the unstable one. So I stayed scrupulously clean while he stayed scrupulously documented. Everything I gathered, I was entitled to. Everything I did, I could explain to a judge with a straight back. The blue dot was his. The receipts were on accounts that were half mine. The trail was his own. I just followed it, calmly, exactly as far as it went, and not one step past where I had a right to be. My lawyer prepared the divorce filing, built on a documented pattern and a paper trail of exactly where our money had been going. I made copies of everything twice, one set with my lawyer. One set somewhere only I could reach, because a planner like Greg, if he ever caught the scent, would not hesitate to make documents disappear. I changed the passwords on my own personal accounts, the ones that were only ever mine. I gathered the household records I'd need to start a clean, separate life, insurance, the title work, the tax returns, the things you never think about until you suddenly, urgently, need to be able to prove. And I made a quiet appointment with myself, in my own head, for the day it would all be ready, because I'd decided early that I would not act 1 hour before everything was in place, and not 1 hour after. The day I was ready would be the day, not his timeline. Mine, and the whole time, every evening I asked Greg about his long, hard days at the office, and told him not to work so late, and watched him relax a little more each night, certain that his wife had no idea. There was one moment, on day 8, when I nearly lost it. Greg came home and casually mentioned that he'd been thinking about turning off the location sharing, since it drains the battery. My heart stopped. If he turned it off, the live pattern stopped. So I did the only thing I could. I smiled and said, "Oh no, please don't. It makes me feel safe knowing where you are." I used his own old line right back at him. And he paused, and he smiled, and he said, "Of course. Whatever makes you feel safe." And he left it on. The man kept his own tracking device running because I made him feel like a good husband for doing it. That was the closest it came to falling apart. I lay awake that night, day 8, longer than any other night, because the near miss had rattled me. It made me realize how fragile the whole thing was, how it all rested on a man continuing to believe his wife was exactly as unaware as he needed her to be. Every dinner where I asked about his long day, every time I kissed him goodbye and watched the dot leave for that apartment, I was performing the most important role of my life, and one wrong expression could end it. I got very good that week at a particular small smile. The one that says, "I trust you completely. I have no idea. You're safe." It is an exhausting thing to wear that smile across a dinner table from someone you've just watched lie. But I wore it for 11 days. Because every day I wore it was a day my lawyer turned into another piece of solid ground beneath me. Day 11. Everything was in place. The filing was ready. The accounts were secured. The file was complete. And so I did the last thing on my list, and it was the simplest thing of all. That evening, Greg came home and started to tell me about his day, another long meeting, another nightmare at the office. And I let him finish. I let him build the whole lie, brick by careful brick, the way he had for 11 days. And then I slid a folder across the table. On top was a single screenshot. The blue dot. 40 miles away. Time stamped to the morning he'd told me about his very first budget meeting. Underneath it were 10 more, one for each day, a perfect map of every lie. Underneath those were the receipts, the address, the name, and underneath all of it was the divorce filing, already prepared. I watched Greg, the great planner, look at a plan far better organized than any of his. I watched the color drain out of his face from the bottom up. He looked at the dots. He looked at the dates. And he understood all at once that the location sharing he had set up to keep track of me had spent 11 days quietly keeping track of him, and that I had never once needed to raise my voice, because the map had said everything for me. He did the things they do. First, the denial it wasn't what it looked like. It was complicated. I'd misread the data. I almost admired the instinct to argue with a map. Then, when the receipts came into focus, the anger, how dare I track him? How dare I go through his accounts, as if accounts that were half mine were a violation for me to read. And finally, when the divorce filing sat there on the table in his own careful world turned against him, the bargaining, couldn't we talk about this? Couldn't we keep it quiet? Did we really need lawyers? The same arc every time, from every one of them. Deny, attack, bargain, what none of them ever do, in that first moment, is the one thing that might have mattered years earlier. Simply tell the truth. Greg had built his whole life on managing information. He had no idea what to do in a room where I already had all of it. He started to explain. I held up my hand, and I said the only sentence I had prepared. I said, "Greg, you taught me to always know where the important things are. I finally took your advice, and I let the folder do the rest. I didn't scream. I didn't drive 40 miles to make a scene at Renata's door. I never even said her name out loud. I let 11 days of his own data and his own carefully shared little blue dot say all of it for me. The divorce was clean, because by the time he knew there was a war, it was already over. The documented spending on the affair did him no favors. I kept what was mine and then some, and I walked away with my dignity completely intact. Greg, the planner, Learned that the most dangerous system in the world is the one you build to watch someone else, and then forget is pointed at you. Renata, I heard, did not last long once the secret life came into the daylight and turned into a very public, very expensive divorce. There isn't much romance left in a man whose own map convicted him. What surprised me, in the months after, was how the dot changed meaning for me. For 2 years it had been a symbol of being watched Greg's quiet little leash, dressed up as care, and in 11 days it became the thing that set me free. I think about that a lot. How a tool is only ever as honest as the person holding it, and how the systems people build to control you can become the exact evidence that releases you, if you keep your head. I turned my own location sharing off the day the divorce was final. Not out of bitterness. Just because, for the first time in 7 years, the only person who needed to know where I was me. And if you'll let me leave you with one thing, not as someone who got revenge, but as someone who learned to trust the quiet voice that says something doesn't add up, it's this. When the data and the story don't match, believe the data. Not in a paranoid way, in a clear-eyed, grounded, grown-up way. You are allowed to love someone and still notice when the map and the words point in different directions. You are allowed to stay calm and gather what's true and choose your own moment. The people who truly love you will never make you feel crazy for noticing what's right in front of you. Only the ones with something to hide ever do. And one more thing, for the person watching who is sitting in their own version of that parking lot tonight. The hardest part is not finding the truth. The hardest part is the silence between knowing it and being ready to act on it, the dinners, the small smiles, the lying awake. If you are in that silence right now, I want you to know it is not weakness and it is not deceit. It is strategy. It is a person protecting herself while she gets her feet under her. You are allowed to take the time you need to land on solid ground before you say a single word. The truth will still be true next week. Make sure you're standing somewhere safe when you finally speak it. There's one more thing, though. A few weeks after the divorce was final, I got a message from Renata herself. Not an apology, a question. She wanted to know if Greg had ever shared his location with me, because he'd just asked her to turn hers on, so he'd never have to worry about her. What I told her, and what the two of us pieced together about the man we'd both trusted, is a story entirely its own. And it might just be the most satisfying one yet. It's right there on your screen. You are going to want to see how that one ends.